9. I did to you for the next 4 years what my teenagers sometimes do to me in the classroom. I heard what you said, but I did not listen. You know, I used to get up some morning and I'd open up the book and I'd say, now on page 74 we're going to do such and so and so and so and so and so, and I'd get all through with all these great directions, and some old boy in the back would say, what page are we on? And I'd say, won't you listen to me? Oh, I heard you, but I wasn't listening. And I know exactly, because I did that to you for 4 years with all my excuses and with all my rationalization, all of my telling every group that I would go to, you know, you don't understand me. I'm different. I wouldn't listen to the pain. I didn't see the pain. I didn't try to identify with the pain. And as I said in the beginning, the humiliation and the degradation of a woman drunk. I'm not taking one thing away from any man alcoholic in this room. But, Lord, you can get away with so much more than we can. You can get all balled up, and you can put a lampshade on your head, and you can get on the table and dance, and you are funny. You let a woman try to do the same thing. There is nothing funny about a woman drunk. Have you ever seen a cartoon about a woman drunk? It's always a man drunk. And I'm not saying that you didn't have the same pain, but I'm saying that, the women's lib's not going to change this. I'm sorry if I step on anybody's toes, but you take a drunk man and walk him down one side of the street, and he's just funnier than a crutch. And you take a woman drunk and walk her down the other side of that street. And I am not taking one thing away from you. But see, the few women that were in then, I just listened to the fact that they'd been in jail and they'd done this and they'd done that. I was so far from rationalization by this time, from real rational thinking, and was so phony and so bewildered and confused that I only listened to the things that had happened. I didn't listen when the man said, you know, Willie, if you keep messing around with the splits, you're gonna be in the same shape. Don't be so arrogant, honey. It's going to put you where they are. And I didn't believe it. Not me. The only thing I did right in that next 4 years, I kept coming back. Something kept drawing me back. I was a periodic, and oh, aren't we a messed up fool with? Give me a good old daily drinker any day in the week to work with. But a periodic with such messes, we get so confused because we can go along and be sober for long lengths of time, and the majority of women are periodic. We can go along and be fine, and we think we have everything under control. That's normal. If we're trying to break any bad habit, all of the people that have tried to stop smoking, you thought you had it made after a couple of years, didn't you? And a lot of you went back. But it was a normal thing, and I would, go along and everything would be fine. He'd think everything was fine. He was just as ignorant of this program as I was, really, deep inside. Because he understood. He thought that he knew I was an alcoholic, but he really didn't know what an alcoholic was. Because by this time, see, when he shut this book, he had his answer, and he told me, you got a problem, you better solve it. Now, this may sound very unkind, and I thought it was sort of unkind at the time myself. He went to some people and talked to them about his drinking, and talked to them, asked them if it would bother, if anything unreasonably hard for me to do if he continued to drink. And if I ever find that bunch, I'll kill him. Because they said, oh no, if she gets ready to drink, she's going to drink whether you're drinking or not. This is old time. These are people that went to hard-nosed sponsor school and things like that, And in the end, he was right. He was right. But Lord, that gave me another ready-made excuse. How can I stop drinking? I told every group I went to. Wore them out. If you remember, I know you've heard the old story of the lion that went out and killed a bull. And he ate it, and then he stood there and roared and woke the jungle. And a hunter came along and shot him. And the moral of that story is that if you're full of bull, keep your mouth shut. But see, I was so full of myself and so confused that I would tell the group, which were mainly men, you got it made. You come in here and your wife gets all the booze out of the house because she didn't like to drink anyhow, and she's so disgusted with your drinking. She gets all the booze out of the house, and she sees that you go to all the meetings, and she gets into the beautiful program of Al-Anon, and she gets her life all straightened out. But see, hon, you might find, like a lot of women have found, our men don't really rush into Al-Anon. And they don't really, are not thrilled to death to be told that you got to straighten up your part of the act, too. And that's not putting anything down on you men, nothing. It's just that that's not really your makeup. Visit any Al-Anon group and see the majority. So he didn't want to go to Al-Anon. He didn't want to hear about being sick, and he didn't want any of that. He wanted to keep right on drinking, and that's exactly what he did. Now, that man out in Seattle, we were stationed out there, and I was slipping and sliding and fiddling around, and he told me, he said, Willie, you remind me of an old AA story we've been passing around for a long time, and that was about a beer salesman we had, and some of you have heard this one a lot of times. And he said, he'd go in and out of these old beer taverns, and he'd serve this, they'd take the beer in, and travel around with it all day long, and they used to ask him, Steve, how in the world do you stay sober and handle all that beer? And he said, well, hell, if I drove a garbage truck, I wouldn't eat the garbage. And that shot holes in my beautiful Mary Martyr, about my husband drinks all the time. And of course I always made it a lot worse than it was, so that you would buy my story and my excuses and my rationalizing. Well, I had managed to stay sober for a year out there in Seattle. But I was the kind of sober that you're going to run into, hon, if you knew. I was sober. The higher out, I wasn't going to like it. And I didn't have to like it. All this joy and beauty and hilarity. I was sober. And you're going to go into a lot of groups, and you have a lot of... They're not always the old-timers. There's some of these 3 and 4 or 5 people do the same thing. They greet you when you come in. It's so good to be sober. You're going to be so happy being sober. It's a good life. My God, they look like somebody just hit them in the face with a dead fish, Well, honey, just ignore those people. Because that's the kind I was. I was dry for a year and really thought I had done something. And God, I'm fairly convinced that 4 years, if you haven't been a booming success with your AA so far, and if you've been a slipper and a slider, I'm firmly convinced that from that very first meeting in Omaha, Nebraska, that God took me by the hand and walked the rest of the way with me. He didn't really let me forget a thing that I had ever heard at any meeting, not that would help me later on. It's just that I would not listen with my heart and my soul and my pain. And I wouldn't let you help me. But God stepped into my life at this time and gave me the most beautiful gift that he's ever given me, except my sobriety. We had been married 10 years. I had been told I would never have a child, that it was very, very remote. And God gave me out there in Seattle, Washington, the most beautiful baby boy you ever saw. I took that little old boy in my year of dryness, and we were transferred down to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. God gave me people there. He had given them to me all over the country, but I wouldn't have any part of what they wanted to do towards helping me. But he gave me people in Montgomery that were strong and that hung in there with me. And they took this phony piece of humanity and they helped her take everything out of her pocket that I had ever heard in AA meetings. They made me listen. They loved me sober. And that's what you're going to get, hon. If you just keep going and keep listening, open up not only your ears but your heart and your gut, and listen to what these people that have been sober tell you about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. What's in between these pages? They can spoon feed it to you. If you're not capable of reading this book yet, if it doesn't make all that, let them spoon feed it. They will. Those people in Montgomery did. Gave me a beautiful, beautiful bunch. A fellow by the name of Charlie. Charlie's gone now, but God, he helped many of us alcoholics to fight that grave. That's where I was going. There, or a place where they'd lock me up. Because I was so desperately, desperately unhappy. Here I had this child, and I wanted this baby so bad. I'd even had him alcoholic style. I just carried him 7.5 months and said, that's long enough, and had him. Hell, anybody can do it in 9 months. I'll do it in 7.5. And he had let this baby live, not even weighing 2 pounds when he came into the world. And I still couldn't open up my heart and find the joy and the happiness that this program of Alcoholics Anonymous, this way of life, will give you. And I was still moaning and I was still groaning about the fact that, that was the one thing I could hang on to with his drinking, and that I was different. And old Charlie told me, he said, Willie, gosh, darn, we had a situation here in Alabama that when the big diesel trucks came in, and he said, and God, I've heard this story so many times, and Charlie told it to me just like, it was for real and for true, because he knew I needed it. He knew there was nothing wrong with my thinking if he could just hit it in the right way. If you're working with a newcomer, hit them from every place. The back, the front, sideways, climb up on the ceiling if you have to. Because old Charlie told me, said, here in Alabama, when the diesels came in, said we knew that these men would be handling these huge trucks for the first time. They'd been driving the little ones, and they're going to be handling these great big trucks. And he said we decided they needed something other than just a driving test. We give them a psychological test. So we got us a therapist and we put them in there, and they talked to the fella after he passed his road test. and they'd give him a hypothetical situation. This old boy had passed his road test fine. He got in there, and the man said, now, what'd you do about this situation? He said, if you're in your truck, and you're coming down a hill, steep hill, and you get down at the very bottom, and you put on your brakes, and you don't have any brakes. What would you do? The old boy sat there a minute, and he said, I believe I'd wake up Leroy. And the man thought, well, that shows compassion, but I want him to put it into words. And he said, well, why would you wake up your helper, Old boy sat there a minute, he said, Leroy, he ain't never seen a great big wreck. See, what Charlie was telling me, he wasn't just making a funny story. He was hitting me from a side that he could. He was trying to tell me, Willie, you have to accept the inevitable. You are an alcoholic. You are going to be an alcoholic till they put you in that box and throw that dirt on top of you. See, there's 3 A's in our organization. And I didn't know about that. I was sitting there with those 2. You had told me, and I sort of half believed you, that, you had to admit you're an alcoholic. That's the first phase. You have to admit it. All right. So I mouthed, all right, and I think I believed by then that I was an alcoholic. I wasn't real sure that I had to say one, but I admitted I was an alcoholic. Someone with all my, brilliance and intelligence surely could figure a way out of not being one, but I would say I am an alcoholic. So I would admit it. Then they told me the next thing I had to do was to accept it. And I think I had gone a little way along acceptance, but exactly that kind of acceptance, like if the doctor told me I had leprosy, all right, but it's, such a thing to have. Why couldn't I have something dignified and something that I could talk to folks about? But no, all right, so I will accept the dumb decision and I will be an alcoholic. But I wouldn't add that 3rd A. And darling, if you can do that and do it in a hurry, you got it made in the shade. Don't only admit it and don't only accept it, but from somewhere down deep inside of you, approve of it. Approve of your alcoholism. Look around you and look at the people in this room. Do they look all that bad off? And then go out to a hospital, mental or a physical hospital, and look at them. We have a treatable illness. And from that, when I latched on to that, and those people gave me that approval, and try to do it for yourself if you haven't gotten there yet. If you have accepted, if you have admitted, God learned to approve. It's all right. Look at the good company I'm in. Really look at this way of life that they were offering. They weren't offering me, now, Willie, like, if I'd have had a disease that you can't eat this, you can't eat that, you can't do this, you can't do this. They didn't tell me I couldn't do anything as far as really important things in the world, except I couldn't drink booze. And then they told me some things that I had to do in this program to repair the damage that had been done. Like in Houston, we're trying to fix the potholes. And I had a bunch of potholes to be fixed. They gave me a way to fix the potholes. Beautiful way. Not a hang dog sorrowful, pitiful way, but a beautiful way. And a way to do it with folks that when I looked around, I started liking y'all. See, y'all had given me the gift of friendship, but I wouldn't give it back to you. I ran into a beautiful woman, and God gave this woman to me, and I still have her. A beautiful gal named Rose. Rose took me by the hand and walked with me the rest of the way. One day she said to me, she said, Willie, and in Montgomery, Alabama, that took Rose about 15 minutes. Willie, honey, another 15. When are you going to get your sense of humor back? I said, darling, you're going to live as an alcoholic for the rest of your life. You might as well have a little fun out of it. Because, see, I was still belly aching about his drinking. Now, before I go one step further, I want to assure you my husband's sitting home right now drinking. Now, but he is one of these, and you're going to hear this debated over and over. Don't pay attention to the debate because it really is not all that big a deal. He is what you call a normal, whatever that is, and I'm going to tell you what it is in a minute as far as I'm concerned. He is a normal drinker. This man's been drinking from now on to 45, 50 years. He drinks the same way now as he did over 30 years when I married him. Same dumb way. There. And he's the kind of drinker, he comes in the afternoon, and he used to come off the flight line, and he was about then when I was doing all my belly aching. He'd come in off the flight line, he'd be tired, and he'd shake up that pitcher of martinis, you know, and he'd pour him a couple, and I could just see the tiredness just rolling off of him. And I would say to him, you know, how can you do this to me? Now just think about that. I had put this man through pure, unmitigated hell for years, and I was with my Mary Martyr flag waving high. How can you do this to me? I'm trying to be good. I'm trying. These people, so, because at that time you were still these people. These people tell me that I can't take a drink and I can't take a pill, and I get so nervous. I'm here with the baby all day long, and it makes me so nervous, and I can't do anything about it. And my man looked at me and gave me a beautiful piece of not deep philosophy like I had been looking for, but he said to me, hell, just be nervous. That's one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. Because, you know, it's all right. Just be nervous. He's learned to, you know, regret those words. Because I get up a lot of mornings and I announce, this is my nervous day, and I am going to be nervous all day long. And furthermore, I'm going to make everybody around me nervous if I possibly can. You had been telling me, will it just be? You know, every day can't be coming up roses. The only people that are happy every day are those people that are going blah, blah, blah out someplace. You know, and they're locked up in these little places. We're out here living life. Of course there's going to be up days, there's going to be down days, there's going to be brown days, tan days, in between days. God wouldn't have given me a nervous system if he didn't mean for me to have my nervous time. And you know, I just passed through a period in my life where I would get pretty nervous sometimes. I could thread a sewing machine and it's a running. had just been telling me over and over, just be. And you know, you're going to have down days, you kept saying. Of course, nowadays, we got to be depressed. Isn't that the most depressing word? Depressed. I love when one of my little pigeons called me and said, Willie, I'm depressed. And I always want to say, oh, hell. Did you expect not to be for the rest of your life? What are you looking for? But it was the same thing. See, I have to go back. And I don't say that to her because I know how I kick that word around. Because, man, when I didn't have anything else to do, I'd have depression, you know. Real depression. What it was deep gut anger. Because I couldn't do what I wanted to do, and that was drink and party and have the good time that I thought I was missing. But he would be, and is still, the type. He comes in now, and he either shakes up that pitcher of martinis, or he fixes a couple of drinks, or he'll tell me, I'm going to have 3 beers, and then we'll have dinner about 7:30. Okay. At 7:30, he will, walk into the kitchen, carrying whatever he had, the beer or the drink or whatever. And if it's 7:30, and that crazy thing, if he's not through with it, he comes over and pours it down the sink. And I stand there and I watch it go all the way down. Ooh. Isn't that repulsive? He will pour good booze out. And then he eats. I still really haven't gotten used to that. He eats the big dinner, then he wants a bowl of ice cream or a piece of pie. And then he goes to bed, and he stays there. That's normal drinking, folks. Doesn't that sound exciting? Oh. Think about what you're missing, darling, when you say with tears, and they're real, because when I see that booze going down the drain, I cry a lot. But they're not the kind of tears that I was crying a long time ago, when I felt like I was an abnormal person and that I'd never have a good time again as long as I live. And that I was missing so much because I wasn't a normal drinker. But my man is still drinking, and this is the way he drinks. And Rose wanted to give me a handle, and she did, when she said to me those simple words, Willie, when are you going to get your sense of humor back? Because I was still going with him to the club. Now, these normal drinkers, they get a snootful every once in a while. And a lot of times on purpose, he would say, I'm going to hang one on tonight. And see, I'd pout all day Sunday. Almost like a good Al-Anon story, from here on. But I'd ruin Sundays for the baby and I if we'd been out to the club, and just the fact that he was drinking, really, and if he'd had a little bit too much, I was so embarrassed. And that's something, I was so embarrassed. But I would pout all day Sunday, and on the way home that day, I thought, I'm going to give that a try and just see. God in the garden gave us gals some traits. He didn't remove them, darling, when he made an alcoholic. You still got them. My husband doesn't like fried eggs. So the next time we went out, he got a little bit too much to drink, you know. I waited very patiently. You had taught me patience. I put it to use. I fried his eggs the next morning. Just barely. And when I put them down, I shook them a little bit. And see, normal drinkers don't want to be one of us. And they try to look normal. When he got used to that, I'd put a little green food coloring on him. And God bless him, he'd sit there and try to eat them because he didn't want to be one of us. My husband supports me in this program, but he didn't want me fooling with his drinking. And I didn't have any business fooling with his drinking. Not as long as it didn't threaten my sobriety. And I was the only one letting it threaten my sobriety. Not the drinking. I was letting it. My little old boy got up where, you know, he came in one day and he said, "Mama, I want a pet like Ricky had." And being old, good old alcoholic, you know, not over all my alcoholic tendencies, I'm still not. I said, you know, "Sure, honey, what would you like to have?" You know, I was busy doing something else, so you tell the baby, "Sure, kid." He said, "Well, I meant, you know, what kind of a dog," or when I asked him what kind of a pet would you like to have, what kind of a dog or what kind of a cat. And he said, "Mama, Ricky has a snake." And the old wheel started turning. I'm a country girl, and I married a city boy. And he is scared shitless of snakes. And I said, "Fine, honey, but let's wait till Saturday to go get him." Because we had a party coming up at the club that night. Saturday morning, we went over to the pet shop, and we got us a long black king snake. Named him Jack on the way home, and I told my son, I said, "Well, now, honey, we going out tonight, and the babysitter's coming and all, and so when Daddy gets home this afternoon, just don't worry with him about the snake. We'll show it to him in the morning." I helped that dude get drunk that night. Every time his glass even looked like it was going to be empty, I'd pour a little in there, you know. He was stoned when he got home. Next morning, I went in and got old Jack out of his little glass container. I took him in there in the bedroom and put him in and closed the door. Now, you young people out there, you think you invented preaching. You didn't. No. My boy wanted a little motorbike when he got to that age, and as I told you, my husband's a very thorough man. He's a very cautious man, and he hates motorcycles. You know, he buzzed around in those jets with people shooting at him and everything, but he hates and fears motorcycles. Well, really, I don't want to worry him, but I went ahead and got the boy a little Honda 50, and he was very careful with it. He's very much like his dad. And I got him the next tires, and we went on up, and he got to that 350, and he had taken me riding with him a couple of times, and I loved it. So I went out and bought me one. I have a big 650 Honda now, and we hit the road and love every minute of it. I'm never happier than when I'm out there on the road on my bike. But, you know, when we first got those motorcycles, he'd come to the door, you know, "Would y'all mind being quiet?" So, of course, when I'd find him hung over, I'd tell my boy, "Let's rev up the cycles in the garage." Daddy won't mind. I never let the boy know what I was doing. I didn't want him to know he had a gut mean mama. And we would, and you take two big old motorcycles and put them in an attached garage, and bang, bang, and you can vibrate a whole house and a head. See, what I'm telling you, hon, is not deep and profound. It's what is in this book. There is a way, there is a solution to every problem you have, that a solution that you can live with, be happy with, and have the best kind of a life that you can possibly want. All without the fun, the joy, the gusto of drinking. Everything you want is out here for you. And what I'm telling you is that Rose gave me this key. I didn't have to make that man stop doing anything. And that in turn taught me that I don't have to change people. You have been telling me that. I don't have to change circumstances, not necessarily. I change the things that I can change. I'll leave alone those things that I cannot change. And if the good Lord willing, I learn to live as a normal human being, one day at a time, I think we have a little extra. I think we have a little bit of icing on the cake over those normal people out there. And I think if this is your first convention, first big get-together, I think you're going to agree with me before it's all over with. You're going to see normalcy with some icing on it. You know, a lot of people have asked me, especially lay people, when I go to talk at schools and to groups of doctors and people like this that really don't know from nothing. But, I mean, they're trying to learn, and I'm glad for this. But they'll say, you know, what is AA? I don't know. I think if we could ever define it, we might lose it. Because it's what it is to you and you and you and to me and to Ann here and all of you. That's what's so fantastic about this thing. It can be what we need it to be for each of us, each in our own individual way. It's a program, sure, and we do it like it says to, but it can do with us as individuals all of these different things that it's done for all of us out here. And I don't know. I don't want to say what is AA. But early on, Rose gave me this copy, and I want to pass this on to you. It was in an old grapevine, 56, 57, 58. And we were together one night, and she handed it over to me, and I looked at it. And I went home, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I wrote down as much as I could remember. I've never seen it again, and I added some things that meant to me. And I'd like to leave you with this. AA is a spirit. It cannot be touched, nor can it be completely understood. It's as wide as the world, and yet small enough to fit snugly into the hearts and the minds of man. It has given hope to the hopeless and help to those who yearned in despair. It has nourished forgiveness in those who knew no pity. It's given strength to the weak and humility to the strong. It has spurred to higher goals those who strove for nothing. It's taught patience to the hurried and action to the lazy. To youth, it's given vision, and to the aged, promise. To youth, to the lonely companion, and to the restless rest. To the sick, it's been a doctor, and to the dying, it has revived the desire to live. It has no judgment against the unteachable, nor has it praise for those who learn. To the outcast, it's been a family, and to the childless, it has given children. To the ignorant, wisdom, and to the wise, tolerance. It is given to all men that which is most precious. It's given a love of life and truth, with enough left over to share with each other. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, my name is Willie, and I am an alcoholic. I got up at the Colorado State Convention with my little book in my hand, and the chairs were all down close like they are tonight, and one little lady said to another one, "Oh, my Lord, she's going to read her talk." She didn't know that in this little book I have a sheet of paper, and it says, "Your name is Willie, and you're an alcoholic." When I was coming in a while ago, there were 3 or 4 people standing there, a couple of ladies and a fella. And he said, "You know, I don't think I'm going to hang around and listen to this guy tonight. I think I'll come back to the night owl meeting, and I'll start saying, good, you know. That'll be one less eyeball I have to look at out there." Somebody also asked me if I was nervous, and I said, "No, I always think about this time every Friday night." I'm so glad to be back at your jamboree. I was here 9 years ago, and when Joe called me and asked me to come, I couldn't remember exactly. It didn't seem that long. When you're sober and happy and have this program given to you every single day, time really goes by. And I didn't realize it had been 9 years since I'd been here, and I am delighted to be back. I haven't found it absolutely fit necessary to have a drink of alcohol since June the 19th, 1957. And for this, I am so terribly grateful. For anybody new here or anybody visiting, we give our sobriety date, a lot of us, and we're not bragging on ourselves, we're bragging on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's what has given me this beautiful 25 years. It's our track record. It's the only one that we publish, and we publish it each time we give it out. If you notice, on the program, I am from Spring, Texas. Now, you folks way down here, a lot of you might not know where Spring is because you have it all mixed up with Spring Branch and Big Springs, and I am from just plain old Spring, Texas. And it is a very small town. It was when I was growing up there. We were so small, in fact, that we didn't even have a village idiot. We just all took turns. You know, being an alcoholic nowadays is sort of a status symbol, isn't it? I mean, we're coming up there on the social ladder. You turn on the television and you talk show, you know, and they're talking about us. And you open the newspaper on Sunday and they have a whole write-up about us. And magazines and on the radio. Lord, we're getting, our disease is getting so dignified, isn't it? And a lot of this is good, and I'm glad, and I'm not really putting it down. But a lot of lay people write these articles, and a lot of people are on that TV spouting off about us. And I don't know who they're talking about, because I've met a whole bunch of us in this last, should be more than 25 years, because I started sooner than that. But I've met a lot of alcoholics. And it always bothers me when they say an alcoholic is. Did you ever see anything that an alcoholic is? You know, as old Wino Joe said, and I know a lot of you have heard him say it, the only thing consistent about an alcoholic is his inconsistency. He gives the example of an old drunk, passing by your house every morning for 10 years at 8 o'clock in the morning. And one day you decide, I'll go out and speak to the poor old soul. Well, he won't come. A lot of these articles, they seem like they want to take us and put us in these little holes in an egg carton, and they want us to fit. Now, when I get behind this podium, I love you men, and I hope you're with me 100%. But I have to talk to the women because that's what I know about is being a woman drunk. And there are some subtle differences. And so I hope so much that there's a new gal sitting out there tonight that is still feeling some of the humiliation and the degradation and the pain of being a woman drunk. I hope you're out there, hon, and I feel like you are because you always are. A wise man once told me, Willie, so many times the personality of the alcoholic, the personality brings on the alcoholism. But in just as many cases, the alcoholism brings on the personality. And I agree with this. Because I've listened to hundreds and hundreds and billions of us. And we got a lot of folks sitting out here tonight. And you couldn't stick us in this egg carton and make us fit. So if you're new, honey, listen to our stories. When I came to you, I found all the differences in the stories, in the details, because that's what I was listening to. I didn't want to be one of you, and I rejected your details. I didn't hear and see the pain. And this is what our talks are all about. This is why this organization is called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not Pamphlets Anonymous, it's not Groups Anonymous, it's not Books Anonymous, it's an Alcoholics Anonymous. The impact of one alcoholic on the life of another alcoholic. We didn't, as they sometimes want to describe us, all come from broken homes. Sure, a lot of us did. We didn't all suffer a lot of trauma in our early lives. Sure, a lot of us did. What I want to avoid, and I want to help you avoid it, honey, is this blanket that they want to throw over us. And that's why my job up here basically is two things. I want to tell you what alcohol did to me. And I want to tell you a whole bunch about what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me. I grew up in this little old town of Spring, Texas. And everything, it's a little German farming community. It used to be before Houston started gobbling us up like a goose. But we're 16 miles north on the Dallas Freeway out of Houston. And it started out as a little German farming community. And Houston, sort of likes to put it all over us out there, but us old-timers, we don't care anything about that. They like to think of us as a suburb of Houston. They don't know it, but Houston's a suburb of Spring, because we were there first. All the people in Spring were good German people that had come over here from Germany and settled there because the soil was good, the water was good, and Germans worked the land. And when they found good land, they stopped. Everything centered in Spring around the church and the school. And the most exciting thing that ever happened in the Spring once a year when I was growing up was the church picnic. Now, when you said that, you about said it all. And there wasn't a lot of trauma connected with church picnic. We look forward to it all year long. Honey, they want a lot of the articles and a lot of the people talking about us want to have us all. From the time of conception almost, you know, they want to have us so full of fear and so fearful of life. And of course that applies. There couldn't be all this many of us in this world. Sure, it applies to some of us. But I led the most peaceful, beautiful life out there in Spring, Texas. There wasn't enough people to do it any other way. I was very outgoing. Everybody was kissing kin. We all were about the same economic level. I didn't hate my mother. I didn't hate my father. They didn't hate each other. I didn't hate my brother. He didn't hate me. We fought just like ordinary brothers and sisters that are still doing it right now. I just grew up out there, and my childhood was so normal. I tried to tell a psychologist later on in life that the reason I became an alcoholic was because I had such a boring childhood. At least I started out with him like that. Because, see, honey, like you, I was still trying to find a reason for being an alcoholic. Because when they gave me this book, I really didn't read it very thoroughly. But at that time, I was still looking for the reason why. I left Spring and went off to college, and don't find any big trauma there. I went off to the largest all-girls school in the world. That probably might show early symptoms of something or other. But at least I didn't stay. I transferred the next year to a coeducational college. Hell, a lot more fun. And graduated in 1944. And, you know, I know that as I look back, there are little signposts along the way that maybe I can make a big deal out of. I tried hard. I can look back and see that in those college years, I went up there to that all-girls school, and I met a lot of girls from big cities, you know. They came in from every place. But even the girls from Dallas and Fort Worth and all those big towns up there, they talked about a lot of things that they had done that we hadn't done at the church picnic. And Lord, it sounded like fun. And I wanted me some of that. But I graduate and I go home and I tell my good German papa that I'm going to New York and be a model. Well, now, Papa didn't know exactly what a model was, but he had just enough of an idea about how New York was that he said, no, that's not what you're going to do. Now, remember, I said this 1944. And teenagers didn't talk back to Papa in 1944. I said, yes, sir, what did you have in mind? And he said, all right, your brother is off fighting the war, and you're going to do what you can for the war effort. And I thought, oh, for goodness sakes, I can do all sorts of things for the war effort. But, of course, Papa didn't have any of that stuff in mind either. So he said, you're going into Houston and get you a job teaching school. And I thought, oh, my Lord. I never saw a school teacher in my life that looked like she had 1 minute fun. Not the ones I'd had back in Spring, Texas. But I went into Houston, and, of course, in later life with that psychologist, I tried to look back and to some of the articles and some of the people talking about us, how to say that, you know, if they really can't scratch it out in the childhood, they say that we're people that have never really been fulfilled in what we wanted to do in life, that we're the frustrated people of the world, and that we really never had used all of our potential. I hadn't been in that classroom 6 weeks till I knew that this was the only way I ever wanted to make a living in my life. I loved everything about it. And when I retired from the public schools a couple of years ago, I had spent 30 years with America's teenagers. And a little lady sort of stage whispered one night and said, "I know why she drinks." But I liked everything about it. If you have one of those beautiful things known as teenagers, you hang in there with them. They're going to be all right. It's a great bunch. They're just kids. And yeah, a lot of them have the availability of getting into a lot more trouble than we did. But some of us went out and found it and made the ways, and that's what they're doing. They're going to be all right. If you're sober and you're setting an example, God's going to look after them. They're great. So see, we couldn't point the finger there. And a lot of times the finger can't be pointed at your perfection or lack of it or anything else, because I was completely fulfilled at this point in my life. Now, you know, all you Texans know, and you visitors that he's talking about, we have some strange laws in Texas that every once in a while they just run out of things to do in Austin and they pass strange laws. Well, I had been teaching for 4 years there in Houston, and they passed a law that said if you hadn't had practice teaching that they weren't going to give you a contract the following year. I hadn't had practice teaching, so I had to go back after teaching 4 years and take practice teaching. And I chose a little university, Southwest Texas State at San Marcos, because they offered it during the summer, and I went up there and took my practice teaching. I had worked some on my master's degree at the University of Houston, and I thought, well, I'll add some more to my master's and get my practice teaching. I didn't come home with my MA, but I came home with something else a lot more important, and that's my MRS. I met and married the man that I don't know, and neither are you in a little while, but I'm still married to that dude. Now, also, along about now, I know there's some of you sitting out there saying, I wonder if she ever did any drinking. Well, I'll tell you, if you were getting bored, here's where the plot thickens up a little bit. Sure, I had home brew as a kid. Every good German kid growing up had home brew. My dad made good home brew. All my people made good home brew. We hadn't been taught that it was a sin to drink it from the pulpit. We had one church in Spring, that was the German Lutheran Church. And the preacher didn't get up on Sunday morning and talk about how bad it was to drink, because he made good home brew. And another signpost that I could look at back in the back and say that, all right, when they handed me a glass of home brew at the church picnic, or at birthdays or weddings or any kind of celebration that we did have, I drank that sucker real fast. I have never been a sipper. When you hand me something liquid, I am going to drink it. I am going to fool around with it. I have watched people drink 50. And I think, oh, Lord, what are you saving it for? And now you could turn this into deep profundity, but it's really just a trait that I have. And I had that home brew down, and it was good, but it was never any kind of a problem. Okay, I met and married a United States Air Force officer, a pilot, a flyboy. And he took this little old barefooted gal, still ignorant with her degrees and the ways of the world, and he took me up to Scottsfield, Illinois, right across the river from St. Louis. And this guy put me into a world that I had just heard about and read about in the magazines. And I loved every thinking minute of it. Darling, you're going to hear from the podium, and it's true. A lot of people are going to say I was an alcoholic from the first drink I ever had. That is true. But it's not a blanket. It hasn't been that way for all of us. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. This man introduced me the first time in my life to all of these pretty drinks in these beautiful little glasses with the long stems, you know, and the olives and the onions and all that stuff in them. And they had such pretty names, didn't they? Martinis and Manhattans. Lord, that sounded more glamorous than home brew. And it looked so much more glamorous. I'd never been in a cocktail lounge, and there was the officers' club, and man, it was always jumping, and I loved the smoke-filled cocktail lounges, and with the little combo sitting in the car, you know, and the smoke so thick you could just cut it with a knife, and the combo so loud you had to scream, and I liked everything about it. The phoniness, the laughter, the horsing around, everything that I had seen in movies. That's what went on up there on that silver screen. And I loved it. And I loved the taste of everything he handed me. If it was new, I wanted to try it, and I liked it. He was a good two-fisted drinker, so he was very frequent with his, try it, you'll like it, Willie. And sure enough, I did. We had a ball for the first couple of years, and I didn't have any problems with alcohol, per se. I was young, I was strong, and I was healthy, and I didn't even suffer terrible hangovers like he did. And I was proud of it. And he was sort of proud, too. He bragged about the fact that that's why he married that old Texas gal, because she could drink him under the table, and God, I loved that. The Korean War broke out, and they picked up my man, took him to Korea. All right, the psychologist and I look back at this portion of my life, you know. All right, here is a young bride, you know, and they pick her man up, and I rode that old horse plumb out the prairie. Took my man up and sent him to Korea. He was a bomber pilot during World War II. They made a fighter pilot out of him, and he just doesn't have the personality for a fighter pilot, and I really made a lot of to-do over that, and the worry and the stress and the strain that I went through. But he was gone for almost 2 years. I went back to Spring, Texas. I got a job teaching school right there in Spring, lived in the home with my mother and father, had my little apartment upstairs. And yes, this is where I did my first lone drinking. My husband is of the disposition that if I am in Spring, Texas, and he is in Korea, I better be drinking alone. I better be doing everything alone. And yes, this is where I stayed home at night. I taught school during the day. I stayed home at night and wrote my man a letter every night that he was gone. At first I'd take some beer up, and then I'd take a six-pack. And of course it was glass bottles, and they got awful rattly. And I started taking up a half pint. By the time my husband got home from Korea, we knew that something was wrong, but we had a ready-made, beautiful, built-in excuse. And alcohol had done a lot of little subtle things to me by that time. Not necessarily because of the fact. Dr. Silkworth explains it very well in here. An allergy of the body. We know a lot. We argue with that allergy. Some people argue with that allergy theory. And, you know, I've taught many a kid that maybe their allergy to strawberries didn't start until they were 6th, 7th, 8th graders. And they would eat some strawberries and break out. A lot of kids were not diabetic when I had taught them down in the lower grades. Later on, when I'd catch them up in the high schools, they would be diabetic. My mother was not a diabetic till she turned 72. Our allergies, the things that go on in our bodies, don't just happen like that. They happen over a period of time. And subtle changes had started taking place because alcohol is a drug. It happens to be a drug that I am allergic to, and it changes my whole personality. I had not been a liar. There had never been any reason for me to lie in my entire life before. I had never been a cheat. There had been no reason for me to cheat. I had never been a rationalizer. There had been nothing to rationalize. I had never been an excuse maker. But when booze starts doing the peculiar things that it begins to do to us, whether it happens in the very beginning or whether it happens later on, that's the only way we can survive, is to lie and to rationalize and to make excuses. We become professionals at it. You know, we walk around with answers to questions we haven't even been asked yet, just in case it comes up. During that time that he had been gone, I had begun to have blackouts. They weren't long, extended periods of time in the beginning. Maybe I'd lose a telephone conversation, or maybe just a part of it, or a part of a conversation I had with someone at a gathering. Just pieces and grabs that I couldn't remember. My blackouts weren't long and terrible in the beginning. So, honey, if you're hearing people talk about 2-week blackout or a 5-day blackout, remember your first one. They weren't necessarily all like that. Pieces and snatches and pieces. But by the time he got back and we settled down trying to pick up right where we left off, there was a difference. But of course we had something to blame it on, and particularly me. You have been gone. I've been alone. I've been unhappy. I've been worried. A perfect excuse. We become absolutely beautiful at making excuses. A man told me one time, after I'd been struggling and hacking around in AA for a good while and not doing, anything I was told to do, he told me, he said, Willie, you've held on to that. You're excuse making. You're still making excuses. He said, you remind me of this old drunk that they pulled out of this burning building one time, and the police shook him around a couple of times and said, George, we have told you not to smoke in bed. He said, hell, the bed was on fire when I got in it. We have them ready. We have those excuses because we learn to be good at it. But I made excuses for these subtle differences that were happening to Willie. And so did he. That's the way we wanted to. We wanted our lives to fit back together again. And it wasn't the first couple of weeks that he came home that we noticed these differences. I'm talking about in that year. We did pretty much what a lot of you will identify with, some of you won't. But we went on what I have always called a triangle. And it was so odd that when I got to you, our symbol was that triangle within the circle. But a lot of you will go right along on this triangle with me. We thought there must be something wrong physically, somehow or another, even though I was not getting physically sick at the time. There's some sort of a physical problem here. So we hauled Willie off to the doctor. And God bless him, he gave me every test that, he could think of and talked to me. And he said, how much do you drink, when he was checking all of his stuff off? And I said, no more than anyone else. All right. I wasn't lying to the doctor. I lived in a drinking world. When you go to someone's house when they're in the service, if you're service personnel, they don't offer you a glass of buttermilk. Service people are generally pretty good drinkers. So I was living in a world full of drinkers. I lived with a man that drank. So when I told him that, I wasn't purposely lying to me, because actually my drinking pattern hadn't changed. The slipping drinks and things like this hadn't really begun to have the profound effect on me that they had a little later on. So I told him that. And after he had examined me, he called my husband in and said, she's fine, she is as healthy as a horse. I wasn't particularly thrilled with that analogy, but he said, she is a little nervous. Maybe if she would have a glass of wine before dinner. God bless him. I was beginning to develop my good alcoholic traits, though, because, man, I noticed that he didn't say what size glass for me to drink my wine out of. Things rocked along. And, hon, you're never going to hear anybody behind this podium when they start talking about things happening. They're never going to say, and from that time on, things got better. No, they got worse. And that's what you're going to hear, and that's what you listen for. It rocked along, things got worse. So we thought, well, if there's not anything wrong with Willie physically, there must be something wrong with Willie mentally. Now, I don't even like to have a headache now, but I actually wanted that doctor to find a brain tumor or something. And then I wanted the psychologist that I went to actually find something mentally wrong with me. And I resent it even more nowadays than I used to when I was younger, because I'm beginning to do these little things, that you can't quite explain to anybody. The other day, I ironed a shirt for my son, and I took that iron and I wrapped that cord around it and stuck that sucker in the ice box and closed the door. Started it on off. I think this is called senility, but I'm not going to fool around with that too long. But I wanted this man to give me a mental illness. See, when you think about that within itself is sick. But see, being a school teacher all this time, I was enamored at that time with words and still like words. And if he could have just found that I was paranoid or schizophrenic or something, if anything sounded better than drunk. So when I talked about my childhood and we didn't find anything, I talked about my college career and my teaching and my marriage, and he kept going into all this. And God bless him, he looked like he was working so hard, and I was getting a little scared. We couldn't find anything, so I started making up a bunch of stuff for him. Now, the only thing about that is that you're going, I was going once a week for my session, and he would be taking notes. This was before the tape recorder, and he'd be sitting there taking notes, and my time would be up, and I'd go home, and I'd come back the following week, and he'd get his notes out, and see, he'd know where I was in the story, the big lie I was telling. I didn't know where in the world or what I had told him, because I had done a lot of drinking in between those sessions, not having the remotest idea that alcohol was taking complete hold of Willie, not having the remotest idea. So I fed him all of the stuff that he seemed to want to hear about my childhood and about my profession and how nerve-wracking it was to be a school teacher. And it's funny, I'm standing here telling you, I enjoyed every minute of it. I'm teaching in college now. After I retired from the public schools, I wasn't satisfied, stayed home a couple of years, then started teaching in college. So I'm still at it. But I told him how nerve-wracking it is to mess with a bunch of kids. And husbands. Oh, man, that is always good ground. So I told him about this husband that didn't even exist. I made up a whole character for him because that seemed to be what he wanted. And deep inside, I wanted it. Honey, if you're still looking for that reason, remember how long you've been looking for it. We want to blame anything and everything. And it's not that we're doing it rationally. We're not. But we have to have something to blame. And naturally, I put up these wise old Indian sayings in my classroom when I teach, and I had one that I'd pick it up on Monday morning, a different one every Monday morning, and I had one that said, when you make a mistake, quick, blame somebody. And this is true. When we make a mistake, we always look out and try to find somebody or something to blame. And that was the process. That was the stage that I was going through in my alcoholism, on my road, on my way. This didn't do any good. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't the psychologist's fault. I didn't know the truth, so he couldn't get it out of me. I didn't know that alcohol and continuing to put it in my body was what was changing me completely into a person I never was. I had always been comfortable with people. Didn't have any reason not to be. I had begun to withdraw. I didn't look forward to the parties quite as much because I didn't like all that many people around me anymore. It was these kinds of differences. Subtle. When you read in this big book that alcohol is cunning and baffling and powerful, you look at those three words and look them up in the dictionary and see what it says. Cunning and baffling and powerful. Alcoholism doesn't just descend on us one morning when we wake up. We rocked along a little while when we didn't find the answer there to the only other point in that triangle we knew to go to. If there's not anything wrong with Willie physically or mentally, there must be something wrong with her spiritually. And I thought, well, maybe these changes in me, this withdrawal, this lying, I knew I was lying, he knew I was lying. But maybe these differences are because I had been raised in that German Lutheran church, and I had gone to church as a child, and it had been such a central part of my life. And here we were moving all over the country like a bunch of gypsies, all over the world, and I had gotten away from regular church. And maybe this is where the problem. So I went to a minister. And, you know, in the German Lutheran Church, it's like a lot of other churches in that we don't just walk down center aisle some morning and join the church. They won't let you do it like that. We have to study 2 long years of catechism. And then they stand us up on Palm Sunday morning in front of the whole congregation. This is the way the old German Lutherans used to do it. And they ask us a whole bunch of questions. And we better know the answers. Because if we don't, they don't let us join the church. We have to go back and study some more. And when I talked to this minister, he found out that I knew a lot about God. I knew a lot about God. It took you people in Alcoholics Anonymous to teach me to know God. And there is a world of difference. But being I knew a lot about the Bible and about the church and about God and theory and all this, we thought, all right, this is not the problem. So we didn't have any place else to go. We tried to fix it ourselves. And as you know, every one of you sitting out there, this is something we can't fix. You know, we talk, you'll hear the word in this group of many a time this weekend. By coincidence, I did such and so and so and so. By coincidence, this happened. A beautiful man in AA, and many of you have heard this definition, passed it on to me. I'm a passer-alonger. And J.P. Muse passed this along to me. And said, you know, Willie, a coincidence is a small miracle in which God wishes to remain anonymous. And how true, how true. We were stationed in Omaha, Nebraska, and my husband opened up the paper one Sunday morning, and they had a little article. He is a thorough man. He is extremely methodical. That's why he drove that airplane for 22 years and never did plow one into the ground. And I was giving him plenty of reason a lot of times to plow it right into the ground. But he's a very thorough, methodical man, and he reads everything in the paper. There was a little bitty article down here in the Omaha paper, and it said they were having some sort of a function there in Omaha. And it gave the preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it said, if you need any further information, call this number. And this man said to me that word, alcoholic, simply jumped out at him, and he said, that is the answer. Now, he tried to show me this. He tried to talk to me. I didn't want any part of it. So he called the number. And after he had talked to Big Mary for a little while, she began to realize I got a live one out there on the base. And she said, well, will she call me? Will she talk to me? And he said, I don't think so, because she's not even talking to me right now. She said, all right, I'll do the only thing that I can do right now. I'll send you a copy of our big book. And she did. She sent it through the mail to him. Now, we talk about the miracles and the coincidences and everything. But she sent him one big book. And it was all over my house after he read it. This man read this book. And he shut it up, and he knew he had his answer as to what had happened to Willie. This book was all over my house. It was in the kitchen, it was in the bathroom, it was in the bedroom, it was in the basement. Every place he thought I might go, he put this book. I wouldn't touch it. Me that had been so enamored with words all of my life, there's a word on here I don't like. I didn't like it at the time, and it wasn't anonymous. I didn't like this first one here. And you may not be thrilled to death with it either, hon. Alcohol, to me, an alcoholic, said defeat, lack of character, the inability to cope with life, complete nothingness. And I knew that this was not me. I despised that word. But things got so bad that I knew I was going to lose this man that I had put in quite a bit of time getting. And I consented to go because he had gotten all the details on where these meetings took place. And I had consented to go to my first AA meeting. Oh, my Lord. I told you I had not been a lot of things, and I had not been phony. There had never been a reason for me to be phony until alcohol really entered my life. Never a reason to pretend to be anything that I wasn't, because nobody around me ever did. So I didn't realize I was such a phony except looking back now. For that first meeting, I got all dressed up for you. Man, I put on the best that I had, and I worked 4 or 5 hours on myself, and I presented myself to you as sort of a gift. I went to that first meeting in Omaha, and I came home. What they said, I don't know. But I came home and I told my husband, I said, honey, that is the finest bunch of people you'd ever want to see in your life. But God, they got lots of problems. I said that, most of the men have been in jail, and the few women that were there, I said, even a couple of them have been in jail. But I said, they are real. They wanted to help me. I don't know what with, but they wanted to help me.